Welcome to another episode of Sam's Motor and Machine, and in this episode I'm going to be talking to you about why this car is the best Range Rover ever made. So to start us off at number 10, it's cheap as chips. So we're starting off on a somewhat contentious point here. On one hand, the Range Rover L322 was not a cheap car when it came out. It was between around 50,000 and well over 100,000 when it was brand new.
Not exactly cheap.
And secondly, running costs for these cars aren't exactly what you'd call light on the wallet. In the UK now, you can buy an early to mid 2000s TD6 or 4.4 TD V8 for around £2.5 grand. If you step up to between £4,000 and £8,000, you can get the 3.6 TD V8 diesel version, and the 4.4 TD V8 and 5 litre supercharged version start at around 10k and go all the way up to 25. And while I think they're all fabulous value at those prices, the sweet spot for me at the moment has got to be the 3.6 TD V8. Between £5,000 and £8,000 for a modern diesel V8 powered Range Rover, that's a steal in anybody's book. And in fact, I challenge you to show me a vehicle you can buy in that sort of price bracket, but so accomplished in so many ways as the Range Rover is. Go on, I dare you. At number 9, it's incredibly practical. The Range Rover L322, in my eyes, strikes the ultimate blend between luxury and utility. The interior of the L322 manages to be incredibly comfortable, but at the same time, it maintains this workmanlike air of durability and practicality. The load space here is absolutely enormous and square, and with these rear seats removed or folded, it's absolutely cavernous in here. With both of these seats taken out, there's easily enough space for two people to sleep in here side by side if you had to. Or as I found out, big enough to put a full snap-on 40-inch toolbox in here as well. Like all proper Land Rovers, the L322 can also tow 3.5 tonnes, which isn't the case for some, or indeed most 4x4s. That just adds even further to this machine's incredible breadth of capabilities. Number 8, the interior is a masterpiece of design and ergonomics. The dashboard and centre console of the L322 has to be one of the best laid out and well designed consoles of all time. I still remember when the L322 was first announced and I first saw those magazine shots of the interior, and to this day I think it's aged really well and it still looks fabulous to my eyes. This design is actually the updated facelifted model that they released in about 2009, but they didn't really make any huge changes. They've made small updates over the years. They mainly just sort of refined the masterpiece of this dashboard that was already here. My car actually has this piano black trim in here, which is probably my least favourite of the options that were available for the L322. And I actually think these cars look at their best with a light or medium grain of wood, combined with like a bold leather choice, like a dark blue or a green. Autobiography cars go even further and add even more detail in the leather stitching and the materials, but I think even basic Vogue models like this hold up really well today, and even compared to the later models like the L405, are still a really special place to sit and be. At number 7, there's a great choice of engines and gearboxes for these cars. While there's no doubt that the engines and transmissions available in these cars improved over the years, I don't think there's any one engine that you could really call a bad engine for this car. Of course, each engine has its own failings, but even the BMW TD6, which is no speed demon for sure, is definitely adequate for the L322. And it's really a pretty sturdy and reliable motor to power the L322 along. The early BMW 4.4 V8 petrol engine, again, is another much loved engine, and you're starting to see some really stellar mileages start to rack up on those engines. From there, it only gets better. You've got the 4.2 supercharged V8 petrol, 400 horsepower, and a crazy amount of torque, hooked up to the 6-speed ZF automatic gearbox, was an awesome combination for the L322. And to this day, it's probably one of the best engine choices you can make in these cars. The 4.2 then became the 5 litre, which you get naturally aspirated or supercharged, and that could give you up to 500 horsepower in a 3-ton brick. Now that's nice.
Nice.
On the diesel side of things, the 3.6 TD V8 replaced the 3 litre TD6, and it was a really good upgrade for the time. However, for my money, this engine, the 4.4 TD V8, is the one to have, and this is the engine I feel really let the L322 live up to its full potential. The 4.4 TD V8 and 8-speed ZF transmission really are a match made in heaven. They're like the beer and crisps, or the wine and cheese, of the automotive world. 300 brake horsepower, 700 newton meters of torque, and a smooth shifting 8-speed transmission. 2 thumbs up from me, that is. This engine and transmission combination was so good, it actually made it all the way to the end of the next generation Range Rover, the L405. In that car it was called the 4.4S DV8 and it had a few small changes to the tuning and stuff, but it was essentially the same engine. So that shows you just how good that transmission and engine combination were. Let's be honest, the Range Rover L322 is never going to be a sports car, but it's not meant to be. The thing that diesel Land Rovers and Range Rovers always lacked in the past was a decent diesel engine that could pull the vehicle up to speed and whatever you were pulling behind it as well. And the 4.4 TDV8 is that engine. That said, I expect if you did floor it from the lights, you'd probably surprise quite a few boy racers in one of these, especially if you get it remapped. During normal driving, it rarely has to exceed sort of 1800 RPM. And on the motorway, when you're cruising at 70 miles an hour, the tall 8th gear and the final drive ratio of 2.76 means that it's cruising at roughly 1500 RPM. And for towing, as you saw in my last video, it's a dream come true. The torque of the engine and the quick shifting 8-speed transmission mean you rarely have to think about what gear you're in when you approach a tall hill. So at number 6, it's surprisingly reliable and affordable to maintain.
But honey, don't you drive a Range Rover? Aren't those bad?
I say surprisingly here because the common narrative on these cars is that they're wallet-destroyingly, marriage-endingly, eye-wateringly expensive to maintain and keep on the road. The truth, however, as you'd expect, is a lot more reasonable. If you're expecting to run one of these cars on a shoestring budget, the same as you might a Corsa or a Fiesta, you're going to be sorely disappointed. I don't think anyone truly believes you can do that, but it is a common thing that you hear on the Facebook forums and on the owners' forums on the internet. However, when you take a more realistic comparison and you compare the Range Rover to its German stablemates like the BMW X5 or X6, Audi Q7, Mercedes ML, things get a lot more reasonable and in reality they stack up a lot more favourably. As for reliability, take my car for an example. It's just about to roll over to 200,000 miles. I've put 10,000 of those miles on the car and the only significant failure I've had in that time was an alternator, which is a common failure on any car of this kind of age and mileage. The 4.4 TDV8 engine, as you can see, still pulls like an ox. Off we go. That's 60. The transmission still shifts smoothly, and there isn't a single electrical item on the Range Rover that stopped working. However, the L322 does have an ace up its sleeve, and that is the huge community of owners that collectively made it way nicer and easier to own one of these cars than any other luxury 4x4. And what I mean by that? Well, no other marque has such a widespread network of Facebook groups, online forums, owners clubs, magazines, or even YouTube channels supporting it. The chances are, if you do have an issue with your Range Rover, someone else will have had it before and they'll have made a YouTube video, or they'll post it on Facebook, or they'll have posted on an owners forum. Add into that the enormous aftermarket for spares and upgrades for all kind of Land Rover products, and you have, in my opinion, a great owner's experience that isn't matched by any other marque. At number 5, it's pretty good on fuel. Now this doesn't apply to all Range Rover L322s, 4.2 supercharged models, I'm looking at you, but on this model in particular, the 4.4 TDV8, it's actually surprisingly reasonable. Knocking around town and on shorter trips, you'll get between 27 and 28 miles per gallon. On longer motorway trips, 35 to 38 and even more are actually pretty easy to attain. And while those numbers definitely wouldn't give the Range Rover economy car status, I think for a 3-ton 4x4 that's shaped like a barn, that's pretty good. At number 4 is the fact that this Range Rover is fabulously comfortable. For me, the comfort of the Range Rover starts with this driving position. It's called by Land Rover the command driving position, and it really does give you a commanding view of the road. But this kind of upright sitting position with your legs down rather than out in front of you like in some cars and 4x4s, for me is really the best starting point for a really comfortable vehicle. The seats themselves are fantastic, they're big, comfortable, supportive, and the heating and optional cooling keep your posterior just at the right temperature. And then you've got other features like the diesel preheater system, the heated steering wheel, heated windscreen, heated rear windscreen, that really make the Range Rover a joy to use in the winter. On cold, frosty mornings, it really does feel like a treat getting into the Range Rover rather than dreading that freezing cold first few miles. In addition to all that, it rides like a luxury limo. There aren't many 4x4s that ride the same way a Range Rover does. At number 3, it is superb off-road. Despite being probably the best driving and riding 4x4 of its era, The L322 is probably also its best off-roader. Land Rover are probably one of the few SUV manufacturers that actually build their vehicles with the intention of them going off-road. On the L322 you've got long travel independent air suspension combined with a fantastic terrain response system, which means there aren't really many standard 4x4s that can keep up with an L322. And with a few minor modifications like some decent tyres, they're truly unstoppable off-road. Even if, like most owners, you'll probably never take your L322 off-road, it's that nice to know it's capable factor that gives you that warm fuzzy feeling each time you get behind the wheel. In at number 2, it's beautiful. At its launch in 1970, the Range Rover Classic was the first car to ever be exhibited in the Louvre Museum as an example of exemplary industrial design, and you have to admit, it really was. The second generation P38 never really got the same acclaim that the first generation did, and was somewhat the unloved child of the Range Rover generations. As an aside, I actually really like the P38, and I think the design's aged really well over the last few years. However, to my eye, the L322 is different. It manages to recapture those utilitarian elements that made the original Range Rover so popular, but blends them into this modern, fully realised design in its own right. I love the way the rear pillars come down to this kind of rounded square rear end. I love the split rear tailgate and the way that the lower tailgate is buttressed by these two chunky light units. And I love the clamshell bonnet with these castellations that mark it out as a Range Rover and nothing else. It just feels like a really coherent design to me that looks great from whatever angle you look at it at. So what's the number one reason I think the L322 is the ultimate Range Rover? Well, it's a proper Range Rover. So even if I'd never mentioned the word Range Rover and you hadn't seen the car that I was talking about, I think you'd have been able to tell the car that I was talking about just from the points that I've been making. Because there's only one vehicle that they could all apply to, and that's the L322 Range Rover. Now it is also true that every time a new Land Rover or Range Rover model comes around, you can guarantee the most popular phrase you'll see on the Facebook pages or the forums will be, "not a proper Land Rover."
So I said, Dad, I wanted a Range Rover, not a Land Rover.
We've seen this most recently with the Discovery 5 and the new Defender and even the new 5th generation Range Rover, and invariably what happens over time is the new model becomes more and more accepted into the fold as a proper Land Rover, and we'll move on to the next improper Land Rover that comes along. Take the Discovery 3 and 4 for example. When they came out they were almost universally hated by the Land Rover enthusiast community, but now are seen as proper Land Rovers by pretty much everyone in the Land Rover community. However, I would like to posit that the Range Rover L322 was different, or is different. You could argue that the L405 has some of the same mixture of performance and utilitarian practicality that the L322 does, but there's undeniably something missing from the later models that I just can't quite put my finger on what it is. The L322 ultimately showed that you could reinvent a classic design, giving it modern performance, but still combining it with that rugged utilitarian practicality that we all love. And well, those reasons for me are why the L322 Range Rover is the best Range Rover ever made. Of course, this is all just based on my opinion, but I would love to know if you guys agree or not. Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video guys. As you can see, I've got a big back catalogue of Land Rover and Range Rover related content, so go and check it out if you haven't already. I've also got lots of new content on the way, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.